This is the story of what happened to the O'Connor family. It started just like any other ordinary tale of grief and loss, but it quickly became a nightmare no one could have predicted. It was 2016 when Claire O'Connor's life turned upside down. After losing her husband Mark in a tragic car accident, Claire found herself alone, trying to raise her two daughters, Emily and Lena, while also dealing with the financial strain of running a small psychic business. Mark's sudden death left a void that no amount of money or success could fill, and the pain of losing him gnawed at Claire's heart every single day. To make ends meet, Claire turned to her work as a psychic medium. It wasn't something she had originally believed in, but after Mark's death, she felt drawn to the idea of connecting with the dead. She began offering tarot card readings and crystal ball consultations, convincing herself she could help people who were grieving as much as she was. Over time, however, Claire found herself faking it, pretending to communicate with the spirits, using tricks to make her clients believe she had supernatural powers. It was a business that kept food on the table, but it also wore her down. One evening, while cleaning out Mark's old office, Claire found something that would change everything. It was a small antique Ouija board hidden in a dusty drawer, wrapped in a torn cloth. Its dark, worn edges and eerie symbols gave off a strange energy that Claire couldn't ignore. She didn't know why, but she felt an inexplicable pull toward it. Claire had heard rumors about Ouija boards and their dangerous power, but she brushed them off as superstition. It slid across the board at an unsettling speed, spelling out a single word: Azazel. Claire laughed nervously, thinking it was some kind of trick of the mind. She pushed the planchette back to the center and asked again, more out of curiosity than belief. This time the answer came quickly. Azazel is here. The air grew colder and the lights flickered overhead. Claire's heart began to race. She tried to dismiss it, telling herself it was just her imagination, but there was something in the room that felt wrong. She abruptly ended the session, but the feeling of unease lingered. That night she couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she could hear whispers, distant voices calling her name. And in the darkness of her room, she could almost swear she saw shadows moving, shapes that didn't belong. The next few days were filled with strange occurrences. At first, it was small things: a glass of water tipping over on its own, a chair sliding across the floor as if someone had pushed it. But as the days went on, the events grew more intense. Lena, her youngest daughter, started talking about a man with burning eyes who visited her in her dreams. She would wake up screaming, crying that he was coming for her. Emily, the older daughter, dismissed it as nightmares, but Lena was insistent. Something wasn't right. One evening, Claire decided to perform a reading for a new client, a woman named Margaret, who had recently lost her husband. Claire set up the Ouija board as she had done before, trying to keep her nerves in check. The client asked, "Is my husband here?" Again, the planchette moved on its own, but this time it didn't stop at the letter H. It spelled out a message: "Azazel is waiting." Margaret looked terrified. She backed away from the board, her face pale, trembling. "What is that? What does that mean?" she asked, her voice shaking. Claire tried to calm her down, but before she could say anything, Margaret collapsed, screaming that something was grabbing her. Claire rushed to help, but Margaret was already unconscious, mumbling incoherently about dark forces. The air in the room felt heavy, suffocating. The following night, Lena became gravely ill. She developed a high fever and her condition worsened rapidly. In her delirium, she began speaking in strange guttural tones. At one point, she sat up in bed, eyes wide open, and whispered, "Azazel is here. He wants me." Claire was terrified. She had heard the name before, but she had no idea what it meant. Desperate for answers, she began researching the history of the Ouija board she had found. That's when the truth hit her like a punch to the gut. The board had once belonged to a man named Victor Blackwood. a wealthy businessman from the late 1800s who had vanished under mysterious circumstances. The more Claire uncovered, the more she realized that Victor had used the Ouija board to summon Azazel, a demonic entity that promised eternal life, but instead trapped the souls of those who sought its power. Victor's obsession with immortality had led him to a deal with Azazel, one that had cursed him and all who came into contact with the board. But there was more. As Claire dug deeper, she discovered a horrifying truth. Mark, her late husband, had known about the board. He had bought it years before his death at a strange antique shop. He had been obsessed with the idea of connecting with the dead, even though he had kept it a secret from Claire. Claire realized that Mark had unknowingly opened the door to Azazel's influence, and now that door was wide open. Claire reached out to Father Thomas, a local priest who had helped them in the past. He agreed to help, but warned her that Azazel was not an ordinary spirit. It was a force far more powerful than they could imagine. The only way to rid their home of this evil was through an exorcism, a ritual that would come at a great cost. The night of the exorcism, the house became a battleground. Azazel, enraged by their attempts to banish it, unleashed its full fury. The walls cracked and groaned, and the air grew thick with an unnatural cold. The shadows in the house twisted and contorted into monstrous shapes. Father Thomas began the ritual, chanting prayers in Latin as Claire and her daughters stood at the altar. But as the exorcism progressed, Azazel revealed the true depth of its power. It sought to claim one of them, specifically Lena, the one it had been trying to possess all along. The entity's strength was overwhelming. It bent Lena's body in unnatural ways, and her voice became a mixture of her own and Azazel's. But in the final moments, as Lena's body began to snap and break under the force of the demon's power, Claire made the ultimate decision. She offered herself in Lena's place. With tears streaming down her face, Claire held Lena and whispered, "I will protect you, no matter what." In that moment, Azazel's hold on Lena shattered. The demon, now weak and furious, tried to take Claire, but with a final scream, it was cast back into the abyss. The O'Connor's house was silent. The lights returned to normal. The darkness lifted, but the scars of what happened remained. The Ouija board, now nothing more than a burnt relic, was buried deep underground. Emily and Lena, forever changed, moved away from that house, leaving behind the ghosts of their past. The whispers of Azazel, however, still echo in their memories. The terror they faced was over, but the darkness would never truly be gone. It wasn't just a ghost story. It was the reality of a family that had come too close to the unknown and paid the price for it. I hope you enjoyed this story. Don't forget to comment and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. I'll see you again with another creepy story. Until then, goodbye.